My name is Clarissa, I am 31 years old, and this Thanksgiving, my family decided I was not a guest, they decided I was the hired help. Without asking, without warning, without any hint of shame, they assigned me the role of full-time nanny for a holiday I was supposed to be celebrating like everyone else. But when I refused to be exploited again, when I finally said no and meant it, the situation spiraled so far out of control that by the end of the night, I was staring out my window at a mob of angry relatives shouting on my lawn. And I did what no one in the family ever expected, I called the police, and let the sirens handle what blood ties failed to respect. It started 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I got the usual message in the family group chat, don't forget to RSVP for Thanksgiving at Aunt Diane's house this year. The emojis were cheerful, the tone casual, as if it was just another happy gathering. I responded with a polite confirmation. I had planned to bring pumpkin pie, a bottle of wine, and for the first time in years, I was actually looking forward to sitting down and enjoying the holiday instead of chasing someone's toddler out of the pantry or wiping mashed potatoes off the wall. But 4 days before Thanksgiving, the shift began. My phone buzzed late at night with an incoming call from Aunt Diane. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. Her voice was upbeat at first, asking if I was still coming. When I said yes, she dropped the act like a lead weight. She told me she was glad because I would be in charge of watching all the kids this year. No questions. No negotiations. Just a statement. I froze and asked what she meant. She said I had always been great with kids, and since there would be over 10 children under the age of 12 this year, someone needed to step up and make sure things stayed calm. According to her, it was only fair. I told her immediately that I was not coming to babysit. I was coming to eat, relax, and be part of the celebration. I had no children, no obligation, and absolutely no desire to miss out on the one break I had all month just to be turned into unpaid childcare. Aunt Diane scoffed and said I was being selfish, that everyone had roles, and this was mine. I said no. Not this time. But she laughed and said I did not have a choice. They were not asking. They were telling me. That was when I hung up. Still stunned, I called my mother hoping she would bring some reason into the conversation. She had always been the one to calm Diane down. But when I explained what happened, my mother's voice turned cold. She said Aunt Diane was right. Someone had to do it. And since I was single and free of responsibilities, it should be me. I asked her how she could think it was acceptable to expect me to spend the entire holiday chasing children while everyone else drank and laughed in the dining room. She said it was family duty. I said it was manipulation. That was the moment something in me broke. I was not going to beg to be treated like a human being anymore. I told her I would not come. Not as a babysitter. Not as a guest. Not at all. I hung up. I turned off my phone for the rest of the night and sat in silence, surrounded by the sudden clarity of my decision. Thanksgiving morning came, and I stayed in bed with hot coffee and a book. No baking, no travel. I spent the day in my apartment in Raleigh, wrapped in a blanket, enjoying the calm. At first, I ignored the missed calls and texts, "Where are you? We need you here. This is not funny." Then the tone shifted, "Answer your phone now. You are being ridiculous. You are ruining Thanksgiving for everyone." I blocked every number one by one. But by 4 in the afternoon, I got a knock at the door. At first, I thought it was a neighbor. But when I looked through the peephole, my stomach twisted. On my front porch were at least a dozen people. Aunt Diane in front, her face red with fury, surrounded by cousins, in-laws, and half the family, several of them holding diaper bags and juice boxes. I opened the door just an inch and asked them what they were doing at my house. Aunt Diane stepped forward and declared that since I refused to come to the holiday, they brought the holiday to me. And the children. And all their belongings. She shouted that I had to accept my fate, that family came with responsibility, and this was mine. I slammed the door and locked it. They started banging. Chanting my name. Telling me to come out and be mature. That this was what family meant. That I owed them. I was shaking. Not with fear, but with rage. with disbelief that grown adults could treat someone like property just because she was kind enough not to cause a scene in the past. I had been silent for years, picking up their slack, babysitting without thanks, being the family doormat while they played the heroes of their own chaos. I took a deep breath. Then I dialed 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line while I explained the situation. The banging did not stop. Aunt Diane's voice grew louder, more erratic, accusing me of betrayal, of selfishness, of abandoning the community. When the first patrol car pulled up, the crowd scattered slightly, but Aunt Diane stayed planted. As officers stepped out, she tried to spin a story about a misunderstanding, about a niece who overreacted. But when I showed them the call logs, the texts, and the security camera footage from my doorbell, her expression cracked. They arrested her for disturbing the peace and for inciting a group to harass and trespass. When the cuffs went on, the relatives vanished like mist. No one wanted to be associated with the woman being shoved into the back of a squad car in front of the entire neighborhood. And just like that, the angry chorus that had stood on my porch screaming about duty and loyalty scattered into their minivans and drove off without a word. When the street was silent again, I stood in my doorway and looked out at the remains of the madness, juice boxes dropped on the grass, a single sandal lying in the driveway, a half-open toy bag forgotten by someone too embarrassed to retrieve it. It was over. And I did not feel guilty. I did not feel regret. I felt free. That Thanksgiving was the first time I defended my peace with action, not just words. They thought I would fold like always. That I would cave to guilt, to pressure, to noise. But they underestimated how much I had changed. This year, they learned the hard way that I am not their babysitter. I am not their fallback plan. I am no longer the girl who shows up quietly and absorbs their chaos. I am the one who calls the police when the family shows up with pitchforks and entitlement. And that is the version of me they will remember every time the next holiday invitation goes out. Update 1. The next morning, I woke up early, still feeling the aftershocks of the storm I had endured the day before. I made myself a quiet breakfast and tried to shake off the surreal memory of a dozen of my own relatives screaming on my porch like it was the set of some twisted intervention. The image of Aunt Diane being handcuffed and led away still lingered like smoke. I assumed the whole thing was finally behind me, that the public humiliation would have been enough to keep them far from my life for a while. I underestimated how petty desperation could evolve when entitlement was bruised. I left home mid-morning to meet a friend for coffee in downtown Raleigh. The air was crisp, the sidewalks dusted with early leaves, and for a moment I pretended things were normal. I laughed at small talk, distracted myself with pastries and espresso, and convinced myself that the chaos of Thanksgiving would fade into a strange memory I would share like a cautionary tale. But when I returned home 3 hours later, the illusion shattered. The moment I pulled onto my street, I knew something was wrong. The cars around my house were gone, the cul-de-sac was quiet, but my stomach dropped. I slowed to a crawl and stared at the sight that unfolded in front of me. The white slats of my wooden fence were covered in streaks of red and black paint. Sloppy, angry letters had been slathered across the boards, dripping down like blood. The word traitor was scrawled in crude block letters across 3 sections. Fool was smeared in black beside it. On the garage door, someone had painted a crude cartoon of a woman crying into a baby bottle. I parked my car with shaking hands and stepped out into the cold air, unable to look away from the horror that my home had become. The front door had handprints on it, literal red handprints, like they had dipped their palms in paint and slapped the wood in some kind of ritualistic tantrum. I walked slowly toward the porch, rage rising in me like boiling water. The walkway was littered with crushed juice boxes and broken crayons, arranged like some twisted display. In front of the door sat a box, neatly taped shut. On top was a note that read, "Since you love peace so much, enjoy it alone." I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I knew exactly who had done this. The security camera confirmed it within minutes. While I was away sipping cappuccinos and trying to salvage some normalcy, Aunt Diane had returned. Freshly released from her brief detention, she had arrived with 2 cousins I had once trusted. They came with bags of paint, smirks on their faces, and zero regard for legality. They vandalized my home with the casual confidence of people who had always gotten away with crossing the line. They laughed as they painted insults, danced around in my driveway like they were in some deranged music video, and took selfies with their destruction. My security camera caught it all. From the moment they stepped foot on my lawn to the minute they drove away, satisfied with their message. But it was not just the graffiti that shattered me. It was the symbolism. The way they had decided that punishing me for setting boundaries was not just appropriate, it was necessary. They wanted me to feel isolated. Branded. Ostracized from the tribe. They were trying to scare me back into compliance, to shame me into surrender. And as I stood there, staring at the red palm prints on my door like bloody warnings, something inside me ignited. Not fear. Not regret. Pure, concentrated fury. They had crossed a line. They had stepped into my life uninvited, not once, but twice. The first time they came with noise and entitlement. This time they came with paint and venom. This was not about Thanksgiving anymore. This was not about babysitting. This was about power. Control. Punishment. I looked at the mess and knew this was war. The old version of me, the girl who used to clean up their messes, who used to swallow her anger to keep the peace, who smiled and said yes through gritted teeth, she was gone. Buried beneath the wreckage they had left behind. What remained was someone they were not prepared for. Someone who no longer cared if the family got angry. Someone who would not only fight back but would make sure every single consequence they dodged in the past would now land like thunder. I walked back into the house, locked the door, and sat down at my kitchen table. I stared at the screen of my phone, not hesitating for a second. I knew exactly what I had to do. Because they had declared war. And I was done playing the victim. Update 2. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to sit in silence after what I had seen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red paint bleeding down my fence, the word traitor screaming at me from my own garage, the pathetic little box they left as a mockery of my solitude. And the worst part was knowing they walked away from it feeling victorious, feeling righteous, feeling like they had done something clever. They believed they had delivered the final blow. That their smear campaign was enough to make me break. But what they had actually done was far more dangerous. They had given me clarity. They had pushed me past the edge of forgiveness and into something far colder. Far cleaner. Vengeance. By sunrise, I had already cleaned the security footage, made backups, and sent copies to both my lawyer and the HOA. But that was just the formal side of things. That was the version of me that played by the rules. There was another part of me, the version they had woken up with their stupid slogans and vandalism, that was no longer interested in rules at all. That version wanted retribution in a language they could finally understand. It did not take much effort to figure out what color Aunt Diane despised. It was practically a family joke. Ever since I was a kid, she had always made dramatic declarations about her hatred for neon green. She said it was the color of slime, of cheap candy, of bad taste. She refused to buy any gifts wrapped in it, once threw away a perfectly good sweater just because it had green threading on the collar. To her, neon green was tacky, aggressive, disgusting. To me, it was perfect. That afternoon, I drove past her neighborhood. I knew the streets well. I had spent too many Thanksgivings in that suffocating house watching her play hostess like she was the queen of a cheap soap opera. On the edge of the cul-de-sac, I found the group I was looking for. 5 local kids on bikes, bored out of their minds and armed with nothing but curiosity and time. They were always around. I had seen them every time I visited, chasing each other, daring one another to do stupid things, always looking for something to do. I parked a block away and waited until they circled past me. I waved them over and smiled. I told them I had a little project. Something wild. Something fun. Something loud. I popped the trunk of my car and revealed 8 full cans of neon green spray paint. Not just any shade, but the most offensive, retina-burning shade I could find. I told them there was a house nearby that desperately needed a makeover, and that I would pay them in pizza and cash if they could use every last drop of paint to cover it with as much chaos as possible. They asked if it was legal. I said not entirely, but no one would get in trouble. That I would take care of anything that followed. That this was more than just art, it was justice. They looked at each other and shrugged. A few minutes later, I watched them pedal off toward Aunt Diane's two-story suburban shrine with grins stretching from ear to ear, paint cans rattling in their backpacks. By the time dusk rolled in, I was back at home, sipping sweet tea on the porch, watching as the last traces of the red handprints were scrubbed away by a hired cleaner. I felt calm. Not smug. Not even proud. Just resolved. Because I knew what was coming. I had set the match. Now I just had to wait for the fire. It came at exactly 6:37 p.m. My phone exploded with a call from Aunt Diane. I let it ring until the voicemail picked up. 2 seconds later, another call. Then another. Then a series of unhinged texts. What the hell did you do? You're insane. Do you know what those brats did to my house? My entire garage door is glowing. My front porch looks like a toxic waste spill. You think this is funny? I did not respond. I waited until she called again, and this time, I answered. Her voice came through the speaker like a banshee set on fire. She was shrieking about paint, about property damage, about how the neighbors had seen it, how the homeowners association was threatening her with fines, how she would call the police if I did not come clean. I sat quietly and let her rant until her voice cracked from the strain. And when she finally demanded to know if I was behind it, I chuckled. Not cruelly. Not hysterically. Just enough to make her realize she was not in control anymore. Then I hung up. No words. No explanation. No apology. Just silence and the echo of her own fury ringing back at her. I stood up and looked out the window. The last rays of sunlight bounced off the freshly cleaned panels of my fence, now a blank canvas again. Across town, her house glowed like it had been dipped in radioactive waste, the color she hated more than anything, pulsating like a signal flare to the entire neighborhood. That night, I slept like a stone. Because she started this war with smug smiles and paint cans. But I was the one who ended the day laughing. Update 3. The next few days unfolded like the last dying spasms of a storm, erratic, chaotic, and louder than necessary. My aunt did exactly what I predicted she would do. She could not accept defeat quietly. She could not let her embarrassment fade into silence like a normal adult. No. She needed an audience. She needed validation. And so, she launched the last desperate phase of her personal war campaign, the smear. She began calling every relative she had on speed dial. Cousins I had not heard from in months suddenly started messaging me with forced politeness, checking in as if they had not heard about the Thanksgiving explosion. As if they were not already fully updated on the details by Diane herself. I knew her tactics well. I had grown up watching her twist stories to suit her purpose, always the victim, never the villain. But this time, the lie she was trying to sell was too large to hide behind pleasantries. She told everyone that I had gone rogue. That I had turned my back on family. That I had destroyed Thanksgiving because of some imagined slight, and that I had vandalized her home with hired children like some maniacal neighborhood witch. She made herself the tragic centerpiece of a story that was never hers to own. She left out the parts where she led a mob to my front door. She forgot to mention the red handprints on my house, the word traitor painted across my garage, the box she left on my porch as a mockery of my boundaries. At first, the relatives did what they always did when Diane got dramatic, they listened. They nodded along. They offered passive sympathy and hollow promises to get to the bottom of things. And then, a few of them decided to see things for themselves. That was her mistake. Because they came to my house. Not for a confrontation. Not for a fight. Just to confirm what they had been told. They walked up my driveway in silence, past the faint ghost stains of vandalism that even professional cleaning could not fully erase. They saw the remnants of red paint along the fence line. They noticed the small gouges in the garage door where I had to scrape away the most hateful slurs. And then they saw the security footage. I showed it without anger. I had saved every second. From the moment Aunt Diane and her entourage approached my porch, to the exact frames where she screamed at me through the door, to the moment she raised her hand and slapped a palm covered in red paint against the wood. The footage spoke louder than anything I could have said. And I watched their faces change. Some turned pale. Others shook their heads slowly, stunned into silence by the proof of what had really happened. It was not just the vandalism. It was the language. The specific words she had painted on my house, insults that mirrored things she had said in family group chats for years. Things they recognized. Things they had heard her say in arguments, behind people's backs, over dinner tables. Words that were now staring back at them in capital letters, smeared across the walls of my home. When the last video ended, I did not speak. I did not defend myself. I did not ask for understanding. I simply walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water while they stood frozen in the living room. They left quietly, one by one. None of them apologized. But I did not need them to. Their silence said enough. The shift happened quickly after that. Diane tried to rally the others again, but the momentum was gone. They stopped replying to her group messages. No one shared her angry rants anymore. Her phone calls went unanswered. Slowly, she became the woman everyone avoided, too loud, too entitled, too toxic to entertain. The same relatives who once laughed at her sharp tongue now saw it as poison. They stopped inviting her to things. They left her name off birthday dinners and summer barbecues. The whispers changed. She was no longer the overbearing aunt with strong opinions. She was the one who brought chaos to someone's home and tried to bury the truth beneath gossip. And while she faded into the background, I remained exactly where I had always been, alone, but intact. There were no public apologies. No redemption arc. No family circle gathering around me in apology. But what changed was the undercurrent. They no longer hated me. They no longer saw me as the girl who ruined Thanksgiving. They saw me as the one who had stood her ground, alone, while the family turned into a mob. They saw the proof, and they knew the truth. And they knew that Diane started this war. Not with words, but with paint. Still, I stopped going to holidays after that. Not because I feared another ambush. Not because I wanted to punish them. But because I had seen who they were when it mattered. I had watched them listen to Diane, absorb her venom, hesitate to question her until they were forced to see the reality in digital clarity. I had watched them stand by her until it was inconvenient. And I had seen what it took for them to finally acknowledge the truth, that silence can be just as ugly as action. I spent Christmas alone that year. I made a roast, lit candles, and watched snow fall through the windows in quiet peace. No screaming. No demands. No paint on my door. And for the first time in years, I breathed without the weight of obligation crushing my chest. That was how the story ended. With Diane alone in her neon greenhouse, screaming into a void that no one answered anymore. And me, choosing silence not as surrender, but as freedom. Because sometimes the best revenge is not payback. It is walking away from the people who only noticed the fire when it burned too close to them. And never returning.